but we don't want to see speed for the sake of technique. So the speed has to be built upon the right foundation. We want fluidity. I saw some of that in your comments earlier. We want soft hands. We absolutely must see ambidexterity, the use of both hands. I think sometimes when people are really fast, I think they're flashy, and they might, you really have to pay attention to make sure they're actually utilizing that other hand, especially when they face the back plane. Things get a little more interesting. So we want the athlete to show us valuable elements. And by that, I mean the elements that they do well. In a broader sense, we don't want to see the elements they're still rehearsing, the elements they're not ready to show to an audience. And we want them to avoid repetition if at all possible. But when you see repetition, I guess what you have to take from that is those are the skills the athlete has. Those are the things they're ready to show you. So we want them to focus on quality elements. We want to understand that there's a progression of skills that they're learning, and they're not skipping any steps in that development. And we definitely want to see variety. So just to recap our judging priorities, in case you're not familiar with them, these are the 3 things that we're looking for. Number 1 is technique. How are the skills performed? Are they progressing toward mastery of those skills, meaning they're being taught correctly and they're not skipping any steps? The composition, what they're performing, and that is collaboration between the athlete and the coach and the designer. That's not just the athlete's responsibility, it's also the coach's responsibility, but it's definitely a marriage between the two. And then the performance, the success rate of the execution. Are they able to do the program? Entertainment value, showmanship, things like that. And then style, how they differentiate themselves from other athletes. What do they personally bring to the performance? And why do we use these priorities? Well, the tenet of USTA is the safety of the athlete. And so as long as an athlete is learning proper technique, they're not going to be in harm's way. And that's how we want the athletes to progress and build upon those skills. And we want them to learn things correctly. If the judges and the coaches don't support that philosophy, then the athlete is going to suffer for it. So it's incumbent upon us to make sure that those things are in place so that our sport prospers, grows, and we evolve. And we must endorse a balance of skills, because an athlete isn't going to be able to take on those other events if they don't have proficiency in all 3 modes of twirling. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about imbalance. Gaps, let's call them gaps. They're stronger or longer display of one motor skill. So when we talk about solo, you're not going to see, exactly a third of aerials, exactly a third of rolls, and exactly a third of contact material. It doesn't break down that way. So sometimes they may spend more time on the motor skill they're more comfortable with. They may spend 90% of the program doing rolls. So you have to ascertain with that other 10% whether their proficiency in aerials and contact is sufficient enough. It may be by design. It may be back to what I said earlier about them showing us what they can do, or it may be just they're not able to do anything else. But definitely when you see an imbalance, you have to evaluate that and figure out why it's that way. When we talk about errors, drops, breaks, or grabs. So drops, what is the root cause of that? When they're breaking, how often are they doing it? Why are they doing it? And in the roll mode, when they grab things and they stop the momentum, we have to consider that in their performance in the overall analysis. We definitely want to evaluate what you see and not what you don't see. So, if you've seen this athlete before, or you've seen them in another event and you know what they can do, but they didn't show it to you in this performance, you don't get to consider it. It's not part of the evaluation. By the same token, you have to figure out what you didn't see. So there's been, those experienced judges out there. I know sometimes we get to the end of the performance and we're like, did she do flats? And it's it's not good, but at the same time, it's like that, you question yourself because it's not memorable and it didn't, get noticed from you during the performance. So we're human, it happens. I know you don't like to hear that, but we're definitely human. So figuring out what they didn't show you, did she do flat and vertical rolls? Did she do, I shouldn't just say she, did he do, a spin? Did he do, closed rolls? So we're constantly thinking and trying to figure out, into analyzing things as we go along. So, all right. When we talk about the 3 modes, like I said, it's not an equal split. We want to make sure we understand their proficiency and what level they are so that we can make an overall composite. Because most athletes aren't at the same level in all 3 of these things, right? They learn one skill really well. They're natural at aerials, let's say, for instance, in the beginning. And so that they're doing 3 spins and double illusions, but maybe their rolls are not up to that level. And so, we're looking for a balanced athlete. We're looking for someone who has a demonstration of skills in all 3 of those modes. So in our judging tools, we have these demand proficiency charts for the modes that help us when we're learning how to judge. And I'm not going to go over this chart. I just put it up here for your knowledge. But it's pretty straightforward. It says, okay, at the beginner range, they're going to do a 1 to 2 spin, flat or vertical, so forth and so on. And so that gives us a foundation to build, to look and understand as we're watching their performance where this athlete falls in the proficiency scale. So that's aerials. So when we talk about the roll mode, this is the chart we have to work with. And so this is kind of where the idea for this webinar grew, is that, this doesn't really help us when it comes to rolls. It's not inclusive of everything we're going to see, right? It's, minimum basic connections, continuous combinations. It's, when we see 10 or 12, 20 athletes in the intermediate range, it's a lot more complicated than just saying, it's a double elbow extension. So I think, me personally as a judge, I want to be more secure in evaluating which roll section was harder, looking at things, and even though they're not the exact same, skill set, determining the value of them and being able to acknowledge that. So, as I said, while we're judging, it's an ongoing process. We call it the subjective judging process. They start off, they do their first aerial trick. We watch it. We immediately hone into a range. They're beginner, they're intermediate, they're advanced. That gives us some clue. Now, we continue to have that inner dialogue and analyze things as they go. But generally, by the time they get to the roll section, we have them kind of narrowed in. So when the roll section happens, for me at least, and I'll open it up to my other colleagues, but for me, when I get to the rolls, it's the roll section is either going to elevate them to another level, or I'm going to have to evaluate how far down, where the gap is between their roll section and their other modes and skills. And so that's kind of the idea for our discussions today, is being able to look at roll sections comparatively. And even though you don't just score a roll section, you don't just pull out a number for that, training ourselves to understand, what the differences are. So I'm going to pause there for any questions on anything I've just said so far. And then we'll move into a deeper dive into the roll section. Okay, so a little bit about roll vocabulary first before we go any further, because like I said, we got to have a broad audience here. So the different categories include continuous rolls. Rolling using the same roll can be done in the standard direction, reverse, or include variations. There will be transitions between the rolls. For instance, when they go from front to back necks, they might have a trap in there, or they might have a monster in there. When they go from forward to reverse fishtails, are they going to do like a half carry to get there? Are they going to, connect the 2 fishtails? So continuous rolls, meaning the same roll over and over, but there are other things in play there. Then we have combination rolls, which is connecting different rolls. And that can be done in a simple way or a complex way. simple, elbow extension. Complex, cut back, drop in, reverse cut back, other drop in, elbow carry. I mean, that's, crazy combinations. But you have to be able to evaluate which of those connections are harder, understand when they change directions or they go forward to reverse or reverse to forward, that they're doing that. Because sometimes with the speed and with the way that the programs are designed, it masks itself sometimes. So you have to really hone in and make sure you're understanding, especially when they use the back plane. When they use the back plane and they start with their left hand, it looks different to you. So, being able to acknowledge the demand of what they're doing. And then, of course, we want to see a variety of roll skills: open rolls with the arm extended away from the body, closed rolls, those executed toward the center of the body, but also aerials and pops. And I meant to put long arm roll in there on the aerials too. So, and I mean by catching in the long arm roll. So those are just some of the roll vocabulary that we have. And why are rolls hard to judge? Well, it's because of a lot of details. And I'm not going to read this whole slide to you, but they're hard to evaluate because errors happen. They have to grab, or there's a balance check, or they have to restart. They grab it and they have to actually restart. It's not apples to apples. They're not doing exactly the same skills. But what we want to see is proper technical execution. That should be valued above all else. So when you see the rolls being done correctly, when you see them giving the patience and the time, even if it's slower, then that is more valuable than someone who's constantly having to grab it or restart, or doesn't have those connections built in. We want to see that variety. We as judges, we have to understand what's more difficult. So the sport is constantly evolving and they're bringing new roles out there, and you have to know what's more difficult and which direction is more difficult as well. We have to identify the progression of role skills. So if they've missed a step, that's probably why you're not seeing a certain skill, is because they never learned how to do that element. Does the judge's own skill set color the analysis? And by that, I mean, when you twirled, if rolls were easy for you, you might look at a roll section and think, that's not so hard. And conversely, if rolls were hard for you, every time you see a really cool roll section, you'd be like, oh, that's really awesome. But you have to take yourself out of that picture. You have to know with that athlete, what that mode they're displaying is for them, and they're rounding out of their skills. So a couple things to look at, and I could go on probably, I guess, for 3 hours on this webinar, but I won't. The rhythm of the rolls. Are they pushing it? Are they chasing it? Is it getting ahead of them? Are they able to have balance? By balance, I mean, that's what rolls are all about, balancing the baton on their body. Their elbow levels. Are they really this high, or are they more level? What's the entrance to them? What's the resolution? What's the reception? Are they being cognizant of their body and footwork? Because that's has a big effect on what they're doing, where their hips are. In neck rolls, if you're not doing the footwork, you're not rolling. So, and then you have the little things I like to call a reflex, when they get that little pinky out there, and I know they don't mean to do it, but it's still there. And is it helping, or is it grabbing? And it's things like that constantly have to factor into your evaluation. And of course, making sure they're showing you both left and right. When you don't see a lot of left, that might be because that's just their proficiency. They're just not there in that left hand yet, left arm. So, all right. I don't want to harp too much on traps, but it is something we see in both design and instantaneously. So when you see those traps, you just have to understand that, yes, it's stopping the direction of the baton, the flow of the baton, but why is that happening? So at the lower levels, it's part of their learning and their development. In a monster roll, for example, it just tells you their proficiency. If they have to trap each section as they go, they're just not there yet. But in general, a trap is preferred over grabbing. So, you know, if they need to build that in, if the designer has to put that in, then that's better than them trying to do continuous cutbacks and having to grab because they don't have the skills yet. So, okay. We want, as I said, to see and reward proper technique of rolls. Those athletes who show greater skill and patience, who show proper technique, may score higher than those who are showing higher skills but aren't doing them properly, who are having to aid the rolls. When a roll is stopped, you need to evaluate why that happened. And it varies. Like in the beginning of the season, I see a lot of roll sections that are just too difficult for them. They're not there yet, but they need to practice, and so that's why they're performing them for me. Later in the season, you know, that shouldn't be the case. It shouldn't be the difficulty there. Is it instantaneous error, or is it, you know, they just got impatient and grabbed it and restarted? So those are all the things you need to consider. So we are going to watch, I have 2 athletes for you to watch, and we're going to compare and contrast and say which section has more value. Now, like I said, we don't score just a roll section, but I want you to compare the 2 and just think about all the things I've just said, and, you know, just, you know, be able to determine which one would have more value to you. So I'm going to copy some links into the chat box to a Google Drive video. And I'll give you a couple minutes to do this because I know that, you know, everyone has to click on the link and you know, get their internet connection in. Would you put more value on roll section number 1 or roll section number 2 of the clips we watched? Okay. Okay, we have a little bit of a split here. Okay. So for me, I'm on athlete number 2, and here's why. And I would welcome anyone who wants to discuss this so we can talk about it. But for me, there was a little bit stronger technical display, a little bit more speed, a little bit more control. She had more variety. She had those reverse cutbacks in there. And I thought she was just a little bit tighter and cleaner than the first girl. I think the first girl is learning things properly. She's got the ladders in there, but that's okay because that's where she's at. But, you know, she had a couple of slips and a couple of little grabs, and she was a little bit slower, a little bit labored, but, you know, I think she's learning the proper skills. I don't think there's a gap there. I just think athlete number 2 was a little bit stronger. Okay. Anyone else want to chime in there?
Krystal, do you want this in writing or in speaking? It's Kyle.
Go ahead if you're since you're already unmuted.
Okay, I think that that number 1 had me in the beginning. She looked like a lower level athlete, and it looked like she was definitely learning the skills. So when number 2 started, I'm impressed with her. I'm like, oh, this is a higher proficiency athlete. Her speed is better. Her posture is better. But then she broke everything up. So she had not a lot, but she had less continuity than the first one. So then that made me reevaluate it. That I didn't want to be fooled by the start of number 2. Her elbows were higher, and so when I looked at rewarding what was going to be perpetuated, then the cheats and the grabs and the stops in number 2 pulled me off of her to reward number 1 better.
Okay. I wasn't as affected by those on number 2. For number 1, I thought that she had more aids in there in her program design, and I thought that the speed was a little bit of an issue. For number 2, I thought that she's, you know, I'll say this, I think they're very close. I think they're in the same area. I mean, and like, you know, like I said, we're trying to evaluate these not based on the other skills they're showing you in aerials and contact, but for me, I think it was number 2 that was a little bit stronger. Not a lot different, but if you went with number 1, I understand. But I think most people went with 2, but there was a good number of people with 1 as well. So thank you for your comments, Kyle. All right, so what we're gonna do now is we're gonna get ready to get into the breakout sessions. And before we do that, we're gonna watch a full performance. And because of internet speeds and everything, again, I'm gonna put a link. Sorry, I'm gonna put a link in the chat box. But before I do that, I just want to share my screen again with you so we can make sure we're all doing this. All having the same information. So we're going to watch a full solo performance. In the breakout rooms, we'll discuss the balance of skills of the athlete, her modes, and then talk about her role strengths and her role weaknesses or her growth opportunities in the role mode. So after you watch the full-length video, come back into the Zoom session, hit that green button, and then we'll break out into rooms.
Whenever you say that she's working on the transitioning from role to role, are you mean like in the connectivity sense that she's moving to that next step?
Yes.
Okay. Yes, because it's not quite ongoing. I mean, we'll get back to the role discussion here in a moment, but I get what you're saying. Okay. So she's strong in the role mode. Okay. Do you think her aerial and contact mode are lacking in relation to her role mode?
I think her aerial mode is lacking. There wasn't as much balance. I mean, she, you know, did a couple in vertical and then a couple of horizontal in the aerial mode, but most of her time was in the roll mode and a little bit of contact.
Okay. So you feel like, so when I'm hearing you say, so the aerial mode and the contact material, you feel like are a little bit on the weaker side. What would make you feel like her aerial mode would be in matching status of her role? Would it be in the demand? Would it be in the catch? Would it be in variety of releases? What do you think would step it up a notch?
Well, I think her transitions are all of the connections throughout her whole program, I think, were a little bit weak. So maybe once she could handle things a little bit better, I think the difficulty could be up to some. But she seemed a little, how do I say? She wasn't very confident, I don't think. I think, I don't know if she was holding back because of nerves or whatever, but I just didn't feel that she was at ease with the program. That's how I felt.
Do you think maybe perhaps you're feeling like that because maybe it's because of those transitions? Do you think it's more like flow?
I think
I
the
didn't feel like
flow,
she was
the
struggling.
smoothness, yeah. Yeah, it wasn't actually struggling, but I think that just the flow of the routine, I felt like it was a stop and go sort of.
Okay.
That was just me, but.
Okay, so let's talk about that contact material section. Anyone else have some ideas to provide on what would have helped in that contact material section that you felt like she was a little more lacking with? Okay, so when we look at contact material,
Sorry.
go ahead, I'm sorry.
I was going to say, I didn't find that there was a lot of intricacy and variety of contacts. So I didn't see a lot of slap catches, tight blind catches from, left and right. So most of the contact that she was doing was, slide passes or thumb flips to the back or the taffy pulls. And so I felt that's how the contact material for me was weaker than some of the other varieties, the modes of twirling.
Yeah, it was pretty full hand.
Yeah.
So her wrist wasn't built in a variety of releases, or like you said, in the variety of catches. So it was pretty safe in its full hand mode. I think also look at like how long did her contact material pieces last, or in its connectivity. So bridging that idea that Ambi had there, where she felt like it lacked flow and the transitions. And some of her contact material moments were like 2 to 3 elements too. So, definitely looking at that can definitely break the flow, or, gives a little bit of that transitional, maybe lagging. That's where, she definitely could do the full hand work, but you're right, very much on the full hand work that she had going on. Okay, so now let's transition to the roles, since that was our Krystal's focus for today. She showed us, think about the closed roles, the extended roles. Is she more comfortable as closed rolled or open extended roles?
She was repetitive with the long arm rolls. She did like 3 or 4 of those. And she tried to go from open to closed, but wasn't very successful. She had some variety, but I don't think, she would do a couple of pops and then she would do some cutbacks. But again, it didn't flow. There weren't smooth transitions. And I thought that her weakest, she displayed some back neck rolls with traps, but I don't think she was very confident in those at all.
Mm-hmm.
That was a weakness, I thought.
Okay. Well, I think she was comfortable in the cuts, and I think that
Yeah.
she was a little bit more, she was definitely comfortable in the closed mode. She didn't, you know, I didn't feel like she was uh, working to keep them going. I felt like she was comfortable in the closed mode. I think there was 2 items that made me question that I felt like was a little bit of gapping, like the ladders, the continuous elbows. You know, she had that part where those 2 items is kind of like, okay, you know, where I felt like in her role mode, that was a little bit of an imbalance in comparison to what her capabilities are. So, okay, so it looks like we're being asked to go back to the main room.
I got the best of everything, really.
We're back.
You're back. Okay. Well, Abby won the race back, so I guess we'll go to her first. So
She
we'll have
always
her.
does.
We'll have her recap her discussions for us. Go ahead.
All right. You want to start with the balance of skills?
Yes,
Krystal. Okay. So Coralie was a brave one that went first, and she spoke, and she said she had great handling. She did say from the very beginning she thought she was right-hand dominant until she got to her roles. So then she had some right and left within the roles, so she was balanced there. And then she thought we were questioning. Laura Cobb had mentioned, which that you had said earlier, did she do flat aerials? And almost every single body went, did she do flat aerials? So we thought there might be an imbalance there as well, because we had a question even if she did them.
Mm-hmm. Okay. What about her role strengths and weaknesses?
Her role strengths, Kim had mentioned that she had open and closed roles. There wasn't a whole lot of handling or using that little pinky you had talked about. And then good timing with her cutbacks as well. Her weaknesses, we were kind of questioning some of her connections. She did have some interesting connections, but some of them were isolated and then some were connected. So it wasn't consistent throughout.
Yeah, she had like little sections that were interesting, but not all together.
Cohesive. Yeah.
Because she's not there yet.
She's not there yet. Not quite.
All right, Amanda?
Yes, we had much the same discussion. Had a discussion with Jim Marcus, which I thought was a good point, that her contact material was very much full hand, you know, taffy pulls, very much on the safe mode, which, you know, we all agree that the variety of releases and catches in the contact mode, the slap catches, so there really wasn't much risk there. So it was pretty safe. And another comment that we made, that due to, even though it was full hand, that the contact material in some cases did not seem to provide a nice flow, probably because it's limited to like 2 or 3 items in its structure. Again, that's where she is, but we felt like that was a weakness in comparison to the other things that we saw.
Mm-hmm.
And in the roll mode, we felt like she was more comfortable in the closed versus open rolls. And we questioned the 2 occurrences of the continuous elbows, the ladders, as to that imbalance in what she was providing us.
Right. I mean, I think she was packaged well for what she could do, but when you paid more attention, you saw that there was a little bit of areas that she needs to keep growing in, right? Right. And I know we didn't really talk about range. That wasn't one of your assignments in your room, but if you had put her in a range, I don't know if you guys want to put it in the chat box, but what range would you think she would be in? Beginner, intermediate, advanced? Okay, John says mid-high intermediate. High intermediate. Yep. Good. You guys are good. Look at this. You guys all are awesome. Yep. Getting a clap from Abby. Okay. All right. Any other questions about the content of the webinar or the things we watched today? I will go over a couple things to close out before I let you all have your evening back. So what score range is intermediate? Okay, great question. Thank you for us not being totally transparent with that. So intermediate on our USTA scale is 5.0 to 7.0. So most people were saying high intermediate, so that would probably be somewhere between, 6.5 to 7.0 on a number scale. Okay, well, that's your solo webinar for today. And I will say that, I could have gone on for hours on the other modes displayed and other things about solo, but we really had to hone it in on just one topic. When you think about filling an hour, it seems daunting, and then here we are, and it's almost been an hour. So I'll tell you what, it goes by fast. So upcoming webinars we have for you, Artistic Twirl next week with Abby. It's going to be fabulous. I can't wait. Jackie Stewart will do a pairs webinar for us on the 20th, and then to close out this series of webinars, Dale White will give us a teams webinar. So I will post a feedback link in the chat box for you. There's also one on the sign